My chemistry teacher posted my classmate's private therapy notes about her dad's abuse to our class portal and called it fancy excuses for being weak. After she attempted suicide, I taught 22 students to cheat using sign language, so the teacher filed a CPS report claiming I was running a cult and got me blacklisted from every Ivy League school. My teacher drove a girl to sewer slide, so I taught my entire class how to cheat on her tests. Miss Huang treated our chemistry class like a maximum security prison. Anyone who took more than 3 minutes in the bathroom had to explain their bowel movements to the entire class. I'm not kidding. She made Archie describe his IBS symptoms for 10 minutes straight while we all sat there wanting to die. Your generation thinks anxiety is a personality trait, she'd say, adjusting her glasses that made her look like an evil librarian who definitely has bodies in her basement. In my day, we called it being pathetic. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared us for the Wednesday that broke our class forever. She was doing one of her random bag checks, which somehow always targeted the kids with documented mental health issues, but whatever. When she got to Amelia's backpack, she found folded papers in her planner. Private therapy notes, like private, stuff about Amelia's anxiety meds, her dad's abuse, things that would make you want to give that girl a hug and fight anyone who looked at her wrong. You know what this psychopath did? She photographed every single page. Ooh, interesting reading material, Miss Huang said, uploading them to our class portal like she was sharing a meme. Everyone should see what accommodations really look like. Just fancy excuses for being weak. She literally posted Amelia's deepest trauma for 24 teenagers to read like it was this week's chemistry homework. Amelia ran out of the room sobbing. She didn't come back the next day, or the next. That night, I found out from her best friend that Amelia had attempted. I'm not going to finish that sentence because you already know. Amelia's mom tried to file a complaint. Turns out Miss Huang's brother was the school board president. The complaint mysteriously got lost, just like the 12 other complaints from the past 5 years. I sat there staring at my straight A transcript, feeling like absolute garbage. Here I was, coasting through tests, while this woman was literally driving my classmates to the edge. At 2 a.m., I sent a text to our class group chat that would either make me a hero or get me expelled. I'm done watching this woman destroy us. From now on, I'll do all the studying. You guys just need to learn how to copy my answers without getting caught. Archie immediately replied, "Bro, that's literally cheating. We could get expelled." Amelia almost died. I typed back, "This isn't about grades anymore." The next day, 23 students showed up to Archie's garage. Everyone except Brandon, who was so far up Miss Huang's he could tell you what she had for breakfast. "Here's the plan," I said, feeling like I was in a heist movie. "I'll study everything. Every formula, every concept, every stupid fact she might test us on. You just need to learn sign language. Touching your nose means A, ear is B, chin is C. To her, it'll look like we're just anxious kids fidgeting." We met every night after school. I taught them hand signals that looked like nervous habits. And 2 weeks later, Amelia came back. Quieter, thinner, but breathing. When she walked in and saw the entire class practicing our anxiety movements, she started crying. But like, the good kind. "We got you," Archie told her, and he meant it. A month later, we had our midterm. Miss Huang went full dictator mode. Clear bags only. Assigned seats. Hands visible at all times. "I've noticed some suspicious behavior," she announced, death staring our group. "Today we'll see who actually knows chemistry and who's just pretending." I'd been awake for 72 hours straight. My blood was basically Red Bull at that point, but I knew every possible question she could ask because I'd memorized her last 5 years of tests that former students had uploaded online. The test was designed by Satan himself. Questions jumped around like a crackhead at a rave, but I knew every answer. I started broadcasting through our system. A nose touch here, an ear scratch there. The entire class moved in subtle synchronization like we were in a really boring flash mob. Miss Huang was actually filming us, thinking she was documenting a mass anxiety attack for her research paper. 90 minutes later, I'd transmitted every answer. Even kids who usually got D's turned in their papers with the confidence of someone who just found out their ex got fat. Brandon deliberately failed, writing stuff like, "Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell," for every answer. Monday's results broke Miss Huang's brain. 22 students scored above 90%. The class average went from 61% to 94%. "This is impossible," she screamed, pulling up her footage on the projector. "Look at these synchronized movements. This is clearly cheating." I raised my hand, trying not to smile. "Those are just anxiety coping techniques based on sign language. We can get an interpreter to verify that if you want." Her face went from red to white, faster than when you accidentally like your crush's photo from 2019. Archie stood up slowly, placing his phone on the desk. "I've been recording our conversations for 3 years. Every time you gave me test answers. Every time you told me exactly what to study while others failed." The room exploded. Amelia's parents already had a lawyer building a case. Other teachers started coming forward with stories about Miss Huang going back decades. By Wednesday, she was done. I thought we'd won. Life was good. Amelia was getting help. Everyone passed chemistry. And Miss Huang was probably crying into her collection of red pens. Then my parents got a call that made my blood freeze. Child Protective Services. Someone had reported that I was being forced to study excessively and showing signs of abuse. The investigator mentioned they'd received detailed documentation from a concerned teacher about my dangerous sleep deprivation and cult-like influence over other students. I knew exactly who made that call. My parents exchanged terrified glances while I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. Mom's hands shook as she held the phone, and Dad's face had gone completely pale. The CPS investigator on the other end was already scheduling an immediate home visit. My fingers flew across my phone screen, sending a warning to our class group chat. But as I typed, I noticed Brandon's profile showing active now at the top. The little dots appeared under his name. He was screenshotting everything in real time. My stomach dropped. Of course he was documenting this. Of course Miss Huang had recruited him as her spy. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later, sending our already panicked panicked household into overdrive. Dad rushed to hide my study materials while Mom frantically straightened the living room. But when I opened the door, it wasn't CPS. Archie's mom stood there in her power suit, briefcase in hand. Her expression was all business, but her eyes held warmth. "Archie told me everything," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I'm here as your family's legal counsel, pro bono." Relief washed over my parents' faces, but it was short-lived. Another car pulled up outside. The actual CPS investigator had arrived. Mrs. Chen, as Archie's mom introduced herself, immediately took charge. She positioned herself at the dining table with her legal pad out, establishing her presence before the investigator even reached our door. The investigator seemed reasonable at first. She was younger than I expected, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. But then she mentioned the detailed documentation from a mandated reporter about my concerning behaviors, and I knew we were in trouble. She wanted to see my room, my study space, everything. As we walked upstairs, I noticed her eyes lingering on the family photos, the normal teenage mess, the stack of college brochures on my desk. When she asked about the cheating evidence, I faced an impossible choice. Showing her would prove Miss Huang's point about me being a ringleader. Hiding it would make me look guilty. The investigator noticed my hesitation, saw my eyes flick to my phone. I chose transparency. I explained everything, from Amelia's crisis to our desperate solution. The investigator took notes, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she frowned. "The report mentions an organized cheating ring. That language is concerning." My phone buzzed. Brandon had posted an Instagram story of himself studying alone with the caption, "Some of us don't need cults to pass chemistry." In the background of his photo, I could see Miss Huang's distinctive handwriting on practice problems she'd given him. Another text came through from Amelia. Her parents were freaking out about the cult allegations. She was scared they'd pull her from school, from therapy, from everything that was helping her heal. I tried to comfort her via text, while the investigator photographed my study wall. The sign language charts we'd used for our system looked damning out of context. As her camera flash went off, I caught her conflicted expression in the reflection. She knew something wasn't right about this complaint, but she had to follow protocol. Downstairs, more chaos erupted. Miss Huang had posted in the district's teacher Facebook group about a dangerous student influencer corrupting young minds. She didn't name names, but included enough details that everyone would know. My mom's phone started ringing, then Dad's, then the house line. 3 different chemistry students' parents were demanding explanations about cult recruitment. They wanted to know why their kids were suddenly involved in organized cheating. One mother was screaming so loud I could hear her through Dad's phone from across the room. While my parents fielded calls, Dad found something on my laptop that made his face go white. My Reddit post draft about the situation. Auto-saved but not posted. Publishing it would violate CPS investigation rules. Why does Miss Huang's brother just happen to be the school board president? That's awfully convenient for someone who's been getting complaints for 5 years. Makes me wonder what else this family has their hands in at this school. It would make everything worse. But it was evidence of my side of the story, time-stamped before Miss Huang's complaint. The investigator continued her questions, while angry parents literally showed up at our door. I found myself trapped between the dining room where she sat with Mom, asking about excessive academic pressure, and the front door where 3 furious parents demanded answers. "Your daughter says my son is in a cult," one father shouted. "My kid went from failing to an A, and now you're telling me it's cheating?" Another demanded. Mrs. Chen worked damage control, but the situation was spiraling. The investigator took it all in, making notes about the chaos surrounding the family. By the time she left, promising to be in touch soon, our house felt like a war zone. Mom collapsed on the couch. Dad poured himself coffee with shaking hands, and I realized this was just the beginning. The next morning, Principal Morrison called an emergency assembly about recent events affecting our school community. Walking into that auditorium was like entering hostile territory. Whispers followed me down the aisle. Eyes tracked my every movement. Someone had already started a rumor that I'd brainwashed the entire chemistry class. Amelia's return to school that same day should have been a victory. She was getting help. She was healing. She was brave enough to face the place where everything had fallen apart. But the timing looked suspicious to everyone poisoned by Miss Huang's narrative. I heard whispers about how I'd orchestrated her return for sympathy. How convenient it was that she came back right when the investigation started. The chemistry substitute teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was trying her best, but when she found my detailed notes that I'd shared with the class, she jumped to the wrong conclusion. She assumed I was distributing test answers, not study guides. Another report filed, another black mark against me. Even the school counselor, who'd always been supportive, started viewing me differently. Brandon had told her he felt pressured to participate in our study group, that I'd made him feel like an outsider for refusing to cheat. She scheduled a meeting to discuss my concerning savior complex. Then came the leak that changed everything. Someone accidentally forwarded a Huang family group text to the wrong number, and it made its way to me. Miss Huang's brother, still on the school board, was pushing for a full investigation of academic integrity violations. They were going to make an example of me. The stress was getting to me. After a week of CPS interviews, lawyer meetings, and constant damage control, I could barely focus. In chemistry class, I zoned out completely, staring at the periodic table while Mrs. Rodriguez explained electron configurations. To her, to everyone watching, it looked like I didn't care about learning. The girl who'd memorized 5 years of tests couldn't even pay attention to basic chemistry. The real blow came when Archie found me after school, his face twisted with guilt. "My parents," he started, then stopped, started again. "They say they believe you, but they can't risk my college applications. They don't want me associating with you until this is cleared up." Just like that, I lost one of my closest allies. The garage where we'd planned our resistance became off limits. The friend who'd stood up with evidence against Miss Huang was forced to stand down. Lunch became a daily humiliation. Our table emptied one person at a time. Kids who'd gratefully accepted my help now avoided eye contact. I overheard a freshman telling his friend about the one who brainwashes smart kids. My reputation was being rewritten in real time. The psychological warfare escalated when I saw Miss Huang at school pickup, consoling Brandon's mom. She wore her victim mask perfectly, the concerned teacher just trying to protect honest students from a corrupting influence. Brandon's mom ate it up, nodding sympathetically while shooting daggers at my mom's car. Amelia found me that afternoon, her face troubled. "My therapist wants to discuss your influence on my mental health," she said quietly. "She thinks maybe the stress of the cheating scandal is interfering with my recovery. Even the professionals were being turned against me. Miss Huang's poison was spreading through every system meant to protect us. The substitute teacher incident with Brandon became another weapon. When Mrs. Rodriguez finally understood the context of our cheating, when she realized why we'd done it, Brandon was right there to witness my admission of orchestrating cheating. He reported it immediately, adding to the growing file against me. Standing in the empty hallway after school, staring at the spot where our lunch table used to be full of friends, I finally understood what Amelia had felt like. The isolation. The way systems meant to protect could be weaponized to destroy. Miss Huang had found the perfect weapon. She didn't need to touch me, didn't need to violate any rules or risk her teaching license. The system would destroy me for her. The CPS investigation gave her everything she needed to paint me as dangerous, unstable, a bad influence who needed to be removed. And the worst part? I was starting to wonder if she was right. Maybe I had gone too far. Maybe organizing the cheating had been wrong, regardless of why I did it. Maybe I was the villain in this story after all. But then I'd remember Amelia's face when she walked back into class and saw us all ready to protect her. I'd remember the kids who'd been failing, not because they were stupid, but because Miss Huang had terrorized them into mental paralysis. I'd remember why we'd fought back in the first place. The battle was just beginning, and I was already losing ground, but I wasn't giving up. Not when Amelia needed me to be strong. Not when 22 students were counting on me to see this through. Miss Huang thought she'd won by turning the system against me. She didn't realize she'd just taught me how to fight on her level. The library became my first battlefield. Miss Huang had started her private tutoring sessions there, positioning herself at the prime study table near the windows where everyone could see her working with Brandon and 2 other students who'd withdrawn from our group. She made sure to arrive during peak hours, spreading out chemistry materials in an elaborate display of legitimate teaching. I watched from behind the biography section as she guided them through problems, her voice carrying just enough for nearby students to hear her patient explanations. The contrast to our secret study sessions was deliberate. She was the dedicated educator helping struggling students, while I was the dangerous influence corrupting minds. Brandon's performance was Oscar-worthy. He nodded earnestly at her explanations, asked thoughtful questions, and made sure other students saw him improving under her guidance. The 2 girls with him, former members of our study group, kept shooting nervous glances my way before quickly looking down at their papers. My phone vibrated with a screenshot from someone in our original group. Our old group chat messages were circulating on social media, carefully edited. Jokes about overthrowing the chemistry regime and resistance meetings were stripped of context, making us sound like actual revolutionaries planning classroom anarchy. The worst screenshot showed my message after Amelia returned to school. I'd written that her coming back proved we were right about Huang, and that her strength validated everything we did. Out of context, it looked like I'd used her trauma as a trophy, a sick validation of my crusade against authority. I left the library feeling physically ill. Walking home, I passed my little sister's elementary school just as classes let out. She usually ran to meet me at the fence, but today she hung back with her teacher. When she finally approached, her eyes were full of confusion. She asked why kids were saying I was dangerous. Her voice was small, uncertain. She wanted to know if it was true that I made older kids do bad things. The innocence in her question cut deeper than any accusation from the CPS investigator. I knelt down and explained that sometimes helping people looked wrong to those who didn't understand. She nodded, but didn't seem convinced. Her teacher watched from the doorway, and I recognized the protective stance. My reputation was affecting my family in ways I hadn't anticipated. That evening, I discovered our study group's Ring doorbell footage had been subpoenaed. Every arrival and departure from our tutoring sessions was now evidence. The investigator would see students arriving in groups, staying late, leaving together. What looked like community support would be reframed as recruitment and indoctrination. The CPS investigator called to schedule a follow-up meeting. During the conversation, she mentioned my pattern of assuming adult responsibilities inappropriately. She'd been analyzing my behavior, finding concerning trends in how I'd taken charge of my classmates' education. My attempt to protect them was being pathologized. I couldn't sleep that night. At 2 a.m., I checked Brandon's social media and noticed something odd. His login history on our school portal showed activity at 3 a.m. several nights in a row. Digging deeper, I realized he'd been systematically downloading our class materials, including shared study guides and practice problems I'd created. The next morning confirmed my suspicions. Miss Huang was using Brandon's access to gather evidence. Every helpful resource I'd shared, every practice test I'd created, every study guide I'd distributed was being cataloged as evidence of my inappropriate influence over struggling students. Brandon's mom started a Facebook group called Protecting Our Children from Peer Pressure. Her posts about the dangers of student-led study groups and the importance of professional oversight gained traction among worried parents. I'm finding myself really curious about Brandon's sudden transformation here. He goes from being part of the study group to performing this whole show with Miss Huang in the library. Something doesn't quite add up about his complete flip. She shared articles about cult recruitment tactics, drawing parallels to our chemistry study group. The school counselor called me in for a mandatory session. She'd been required to share her notes with CPS, and my previous conversations with her were now under scrutiny. Times I'd expressed anxiety about my classmates' grades, worried about letting them down, felt responsible for their success. All of it painted a picture of someone with an unhealthy need for control. I attempted to gather my own evidence. Following Brandon after school, I tried to record him admitting the truth about Miss Huang's involvement, but he spotted my phone and smirked. He called me cult leader, loud enough for passing students to hear, then walked away laughing. School pickup became a daily battlefield. Parents had to choose sides without saying so explicitly. Some parked near my mom's car in silent support. Others clustered around Brandon's mom's SUV, where she held court about the ongoing situation. The division was tearing our community apart. My usual coffee shop study spot became another casualty. The manager pulled me aside one afternoon, explaining that he'd received complaints about me recruiting other students. He asked me not to study there anymore. He looked genuinely sorry, but he had a business to run. The controversy was affecting his bottom line. I started studying in my car, parked in various lots around town. The isolation was suffocating, but at least I could focus without hostile stares or whispered conversations following me everywhere. One afternoon, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Miss Huang was wearing a cardigan I recognized. One Amelia had left behind during her breakdown. The butterfly patch Amelia had sewn on herself was still visible on the pocket. Miss Huang wore it like a trophy, claiming it was a gift from a troubled student she'd tried to help. Miss Huang reached out through the school counselor, offering to mediate between me and the concerned parents. All I had to do was admit I'd overstepped, acknowledge my inappropriate influence, and accept her guidance moving forward. The counselor presented it as a generous offer from someone I'd wronged. My refusal was immediately twisted. The counselor documented my inability to accept responsibility for influence over vulnerable peers. My unwillingness to admit wrongdoing became evidence of my dangerous mindset. Reviewing the timeline of events, I made a shocking discovery. The CPS report hadn't been filed after Miss Huang's termination as I'd assumed. The timestamp showed Tuesday, during her suspension, before the final decision. She'd been planning this revenge while still technically employed, using her position to add credibility to her claims. Amelia became crucial to my defense. She'd been keeping detailed diary entries about each therapy session on her phone, documenting her recovery process. Those entries could prove the timeline of her struggles and show that our study group had helped, not harmed her. But using them meant exposing her private thoughts again. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd have to violate her privacy to prove I'd been protecting it. Looking through my history of helping classmates, I realized the pattern looked damning from the outside. I'd organized study groups for multiple subjects, not just chemistry. What I saw as helping struggling friends, investigators saw as a pattern of inappropriate control over peers' academic lives. Mom faced an impossible choice at work. As a school district employee, she was expected to remain neutral in ongoing investigations. Supporting me publicly could cost her job. She supported me at home but had to stay silent at work, limiting my credibility within the school system. Desperate for information, I started using Miss Huang's own tactics. Brandon's younger brother was in my sister's grade. I began walking my sister to school, making small talk with him, learning about his home life. I hated myself for manipulating a child, but I needed to know what Brandon was planning. A chance encounter at the grocery store let me humanize myself to the CPS investigator. I helped her when she dropped her groceries, made normal small talk about the weather. For a moment, she saw me as just a teenager, not a case file. But professional boundaries reasserted themselves quickly. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Amelia's cloud backup contained videos she'd taken secretly in class, documenting Miss Huang's behavior for her own protection. She'd been building a case too, planning to report after graduation when she was safe from retaliation. Her divorced father emerged as another complication. Angry about his daughter's exposure to negative influences, he threatened to use the situation in their custody battle. Amelia begged me to help, but I was barely keeping my own life together. Fighting multiple battles meant sacrifices. I missed a crucial student council hearing about my leadership positions because I was meeting with lawyers about the custody implications. The council marked me absent without explanation, further damaging my reputation. The financial strain on my family was becoming critical. Legal fees maxed out my parents' credit cards, while Miss Huang used teachers' union resources. We were fighting a war of attrition, and she had deeper pockets. A confrontation at a local pizza restaurant showed how far the situation had deteriorated. A family was celebrating their young child's birthday when parents from both sides of our conflict arrived. Heated words were exchanged, voices raised. The birthday child started crying. We'd turned an innocent celebration into a battlefield. My tutoring jobs evaporated as parents cited the ongoing investigation. The final insult? Brandon got hired as their replacement. He now tutored the same kids I'd been helping, using my study materials while their parents praised him for stepping up during a difficult time. Banned from every study space in town, I did homework in my car. The overhead light barely worked, and my back ached from hunching over textbooks in the driver's seat. But it was the only place left where no one could accuse me of recruiting or influencing anyone. Grandma called one evening, her voice thick with tears. She asked why I was destroying my future over this woman. She begged me to let it go, graduate quietly, move on. The pain in her voice almost broke my resolve. She didn't understand that letting go meant abandoning everyone still trapped in the system. My investigation into Miss Huang's past had unintended casualties. The substitute teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, faced questions about her qualifications after I'd pointed out inconsistencies in the school's handling of the situation. Her marriage strained under the pressure. Her own child asked why mommy was crying so much. The weight of collateral damage pressed down on me. Every action I took to defend myself hurt someone else. But stopping meant letting Miss Huang win, letting her continue destroying students year after year. Amelia found me one afternoon, her face drawn with exhaustion. She asked what would happen if everyone would be happier if we just moved on. The question hung between us. I couldn't answer immediately because part of me wondered the same thing. The next day, day, I made a choice that called part of my soul. Standing in front of the school board, I publicly admitted to organizing the cheating. I explained the context, the reasons, but the admission was what mattered. I'd confessed to academic dishonesty on public record. The confession served its purpose. It maintained credibility about Miss Huang's abuse while taking responsibility for my choices. But it also meant my college applications would forever carry this mark. My dreams of top universities evaporated with those words. Evidence surfaced, showing I'd missed warning signs about Amelia's crisis weeks before her attempt. I'd been so focused on maintaining my grades, on being the perfect student, that I'd failed to see her drowning right in front of me. The guilt was suffocating. Miss Huang's brother filed an emergency motion through the school board, expediting the CPS case review. My lawyer had 48 hours to respond. The timeline was deliberately impossible, designed to overwhelm our already strained resources. Through all of this, I began to understand Miss Huang's perspective. She genuinely believed she was maintaining academic standards. In her mind, I'd corrupted her classroom, turned students against legitimate authority. Her revenge included a twisted need to save other students from my influence. The investigation forced me to betray promises I'd made. To prove widespread abuse, I had to reveal which students had learning disabilities, who was struggling with what, private information they'd trusted me to keep secret. Each revelation felt like another piece of my integrity crumbling. My identity transformed completely. The straight-A student who helped others became the whistleblower who cheated. College recommendation letters that would have praised my academic excellence now had to address my complicated history. Everything I'd worked for was tainted. A breakthrough came through Brandon's girlfriend. Her older siblings had been taught by Miss Huang years ago. She provided emails and documentation showing the pattern went back over a decade, but the victory felt hollow when I saw Miss Huang crying at her brother's house. We'd both lost everything in this war. The CPS investigators' preliminary findings leaned toward concerning influence over peers. Despite all our evidence, the narrative of me as a dangerous influence was winning. The system protected itself, and I was the outsider threatening its stability. Everything came down to Amelia's diary entries. Her willingness to share her most private thoughts, to relive her trauma publicly, would determine whether justice prevailed or Miss Huang's narrative won. Something doesn't add up about that timestamp on the CPS report. Tuesday during her suspension means Miss Huang had this whole revenge plan ready before she even knew if she'd lose her job. The weight of that decision pressed on her shoulders. Brandon's little brother approached me at the park one day. He asked why his brother hated me so much. The innocent question from a child who saw through the adult complications reminded me why this fight mattered. But I couldn't explain the complex web of loyalty, betrayal, and institutional failure to a 7-year-old. Teachers throughout the school were forced to choose sides. The union representative pushed Miss Huang's academic freedom angle, arguing that strict standards weren't abuse. Teachers who'd witnessed her behavior faced pressure to stay silent or risk their own careers. Principal Morrison explained he couldn't intervene in the CPS matter despite knowing the truth. His hands were tied by procedure, by bureaucracy, by the same systems that had protected Miss Huang for years. His apology felt sincere but useless. An alumnus who'd been failed vindictively by Miss Huang reached out. She'd destroyed his sister's academic career too. He provided old emails documenting her pattern of behavior but wouldn't testify publicly. His security clearance job couldn't risk the controversy. The evidence revealed something heartbreaking about Amelia. She'd stayed in Miss Huang's class not just for her own education, but to protect younger students. She'd endured abuse to shield others, documenting everything for a future report she'd planned to file after graduation. Her recovered phone contained the diary entries that could save us. Each entry matched perfectly with documented incidents, creating an undeniable timeline of abuse. But reading them revealed the daily fear and anxiety she'd lived with. The cost of our evidence was written in her pain. I finally accepted the hardest truth. My initial focus on grades, on being the perfect student, had enabled Miss Huang's control. By excelling in her system, I'd legitimized it. My success had come at the cost of classmates who couldn't navigate her abuse as well as I could. The decision to be fully transparent meant sacrificing my carefully crafted college applications. Every school would know about the cheating scandal, the CPS investigation, the complicated truth of standing up against abuse. My future dimmed with each honest disclosure. Miss Huang's sworn statement to CPS contained a provable lie. She claimed she'd reported concerns about me weeks before her suspension, but digital timestamps proved otherwise. Her vendetta had made her sloppy, and we finally had concrete evidence of her deception. I presented the timeline to investigators without gloating. The facts spoke for themselves. Her pattern of revenge, the calculated destruction of my reputation, the manipulation of systems meant to protect students, all documented in her own words and actions. Other parents began questioning Brandon's mother's aggressive involvement. Her social media posts grew increasingly extreme, and moderate parents started distancing themselves from her crusade. The coalition against me showed cracks. As all parties prepared for the final CPS determination hearing, the weight of everything pressed down. Months of fighting, of losing friends, of watching my family suffer, of seeing innocent people hurt by our war. It all led to this moment. The outcome would determine not just my future, but the precedent for how students could fight back against abusive teachers. If Miss Huang won, her methods would be validated. If we prevailed, it might finally mean change for future students. But sitting in my car that night, studying by the dim overhead light, I realized something had already changed. The perfect student who'd started this fight was gone. In her place was someone who understood that doing right came with a cost, that systems protected themselves before students, that justice was messy and painful and incomplete. Tomorrow would bring the hearing. Tonight, I had chemistry homework to finish. The mundane assignment felt surreal after everything, but life continued even in the middle of battles. I picked picked up my pencil and got to work. Just another teenager doing homework in a parking lot, fighting for the right to protect others even when it cost everything. The evidence arrived at 3 a.m. through an encrypted file from Amelia. Her recovered phone data revealed something that made my hands shake as I scrolled through it. She hadn't just been documenting Miss Huang's abuse for herself, she'd been creating a protective shield for the younger students. Every incident report, every time-stamped entry showed her deliberately drawing Miss Huang's attention away from vulnerable freshmen. One entry from September detailed how she'd purposely asked complex questions during class to prevent Miss Huang from targeting a student with documented learning disabilities. Another showed her volunteering for bag checks when she noticed Miss Huang eyeing a classmate who'd just returned from a mental health leave. The pattern was undeniable. Amelia had made herself a lightning rod. Her documentation plans went deeper than anyone realized. Folders within folders contained evidence dating back 2 years, meticulously organized by date and severity. She'd planned to compile everything after graduation, submit it to the state education board with a formal complaint. The attempt had derailed those plans, but the evidence remained. Reading through her diary entries felt like violation and vindication wrapped together. Each timestamp matched perfectly with incidents we'd witnessed: Miss Huang's mood swings, targeted humiliations, the systematic destruction of student confidence. But between the documentation were Amelia's personal reflections, raw admissions of daily fear, anxiety medication adjustments, therapy session summaries. The cost of our evidence was written in her deteriorating handwriting, the way her entries grew shorter and more desperate as the semester progressed. By October, she was writing single sentences: can't eat, Huang knows. By November, mom doesn't understand, no one sees. The final entry before her attempt was just a date and time. I spent the pre-dawn hours creating a comprehensive timeline, cross-referencing Amelia's entries with my own records, Brandon's leaked screenshots, and the official school documents Mrs. Chen had obtained. The pattern that emerged was damning, but it also revealed my own complicity. My straight-A performance had given Miss Huang a success story to point to whenever complaints arose. While she destroyed struggling students, she could always reference my achievements as proof her methods worked. I'd been her unwitting shield, the model student who validated her abuse by thriving under it. The decision to include this self-incrimination in my evidence packet wasn't easy. Mrs. Chen advised against it, warning it would damage my college prospects even further. But transparency meant accepting my role in the system that had nearly culled Amelia. I added a section acknowledging how my academic success had enabled Miss Huang's continued abuse. That morning, while preparing final documents, I discovered the smoking GN. Miss Huang's sworn CPS statement claimed she'd filed concerns about my dangerous influence 3 weeks before her suspension, but her brother's leaked group text showed them discussing the plan only after her termination. The metadata on her original complaint email confirmed it. She'd lied under oath about the timeline. I compiled everything into a presentation format, organizing evidence chronologically without editorial commentary. The facts would speak louder than any argument I could make. Mrs. Chen reviewed it one final time, her expression growing more confident with each slide. The school parking lot that afternoon resembled a battlefield before engagement. Parents clustered in distinct groups, those supporting me near the east entrance, Brandon's mother's coalition by the main doors, and a growing number of confused, concerned parents in between who just wanted answers. Brandon's mother's behavior had grown increasingly erratic. She'd started a petition to have me expelled, but her social media posts were becoming unhinged. Screenshots of her calling for justice against teen cult leaders and comparing our study group to radical indoctrination were making even her supporters uncomfortable. Other parents began pulling back from her crusade. One mother approached mine in the grocery store, apologizing for signing the petition without understanding the full situation. Another admitted her daughter's grades had improved specifically because of our study group, not despite it. The summons for the final CPS determination hearing arrived via certified mail. All parties were required to attend: me, my parents, Miss Huang, school administration, and any relevant witnesses. The hearing would determine not just the outcome of the investigation, but set precedent for how the district handled similar situations. 3 days before the hearing, Amelia made a decision that changed everything. She walked into the principal's office with her parents and her therapist, carrying printed copies of every diary entry, every piece of documentation she'd collected. She was ready to testify, to share her truth publicly, consequences be damned. Her therapist had helped her prepare a statement that maintained her privacy while revealing the pattern of abuse. She wouldn't have to read her most personal entries aloud, but their existence and correlation to documented incidents would be entered into evidence. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I reviewed evidence, practiced my statement, checked and rechecked every document. At 4 a.m., I gave up and drove to the empty school parking lot, sitting in the same spot where I'd studied in my car for weeks. The building looked different in the pre-dawn darkness, less like a battlefield, more like just a place where kids were supposed to learn safely. The CPS offices were in a converted office building downtown. Miss Huang's brother leaked group texts that prove she lied to CPS investigators. That's oddly convenient timing for evidence to surface. Makes me wonder who else in their family circle might have been uncomfortable with this whole situation from the start. Walking in that morning, I noticed how the waiting room divided naturally. My family and supporters on one side, Miss Huang and her allies on the other. The investigator called us into a conference room that felt too small for the magnitude of what would unfold. Both Miss Huang and I looked exhausted. Months of this battle had worn us down to sharp edges and hollow eyes. She clutched a folder of her own evidence while I set up my laptop for the presentation. Neither of us made eye contact. The investigator began by presenting her findings chronologically. She'd been thorough, interviewing dozens of students, teachers, and parents. As she spoke, the full scope of the investigation situation became clear. This wasn't just about me or Miss Huang anymore. It was about systemic failures that had allowed abuse to continue for years. The room shifted when Brandon's mother took her turn to speak. She started strong, talking about protecting children from peer pressure, but as she continued, her story began unraveling. Under gentle questioning from the investigator, she admitted Miss Huang had offered to tutor Brandon for free if she supported the complaint. She'd been promised her son would get into advanced placement chemistry with Miss Huang's recommendation. The investigator's expression hardened at this revelation. She made notes while Brandon's mother tried to backtrack, claiming she'd misunderstood, that she only wanted what was best for her son. But the damage was done. The complaint's origins were tainted by quid pro quo. When my turn came to present evidence, I focused on facts, not emotions. The timeline spoke for itself. Amelia's diary entries, authenticated by her therapist's session notes, created an undeniable pattern. The investigator compared dates and incidents, her frown deepening with each correlation. Miss Huang's defense crumbled when confronted with her provable lie about the timeline. She tried to claim confusion about dates, stress from her suspension affecting her memory, but the digital evidence was indisputable. She'd filed her complaint as revenge, not from genuine concern. The investigator called for a recess. In the hallway, I saw Miss Huang crying quietly in a corner, while her brother spoke urgently on his phone. Part of me felt sympathy. We'd destroyed each other in this war. But then Amelia walked past, her head held high despite everything, and I remembered why we'd fought. When we reconvened, the investigator's tone had shifted. She spoke about systems failing students, about mandatory reporters weaponizing their positions, about the difference between maintaining standards and creating hostile environments. Her findings were clear. While I had organized cheating, it was in direct response to documented abuse that the system had failed to address. She ordered psychological evaluations for all involved students, not as punishment, but to assess the damage and determine support needs. The investigation found no evidence of cult activity or inappropriate influence beyond the specific context of responding to abuse. However, she noted the seriousness of academic dishonesty and the dangerous precedent of students taking justice into their own hands. The school district would be required to review their complaint procedures, implement better oversight for teachers with multiple complaints, and provide training on appropriate classroom management. Miss Huang's teaching license would face review at the state level. For me, the consequences were mixed. The CPS case would be closed with no finding of abuse or neglect. However, my admission of organizing cheating would remain on my academic record. Colleges would see both the violation and the context, left to make their own judgments. The hearing concluded with recommendations rather than punishments, counseling for all affected students, restoration circles to heal community divisions, and systematic changes to prevent future abuse. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was progress. Outside the building, our divided groups mingled uncertainly. Some parents who'd supported Brandon's mother approached mine with apologies. Others maintained their distance, unable to bridge the gap our conflict had created. The war was over, but the scars remained. That night, our chemistry class group chat came alive for the first time in months. Students shared their relief, their ongoing struggles, their plans for moving forward. We weren't the same kids who'd learned sign language in Archie's garage, but we were bonded by survival. The next months passed in a blur of college applications with complicated explanations, therapy sessions to process everything, and slowly rebuilding trust within our school community. Some bridges couldn't be repaired. Archie and I remained distant. Brandon transferred to private school, and several families left the district entirely. I withdrew my applications to Ivy League schools, knowing my record would make acceptance unlikely. Instead, I focused on state schools with strong education programs. If systems failed students, maybe I could help fix them from the inside. Amelia emerged as an unexpected leader, channeling her experience into advocacy. She started a support group for students dealing with academic anxiety, creating the safe space she'd needed. Watching her transform trauma into purpose reminded me why we'd risked everything. 6 months after the hearing, I received an acceptance letter from the state university. Their education program had reviewed my entire file, the cheating, the context, the evidence of standing up for others. They saw potential in someone who'd chosen protecting classmates over protecting their own future. Miss Huang taught at a private tutoring center across town, under supervision and with regular performance reviews. Word was, she'd mellowed, perhaps finally understanding the damage her methods had caused. I chose to believe people could change, even those who'd hurt us. Our chemistry class remained bonded through shared experience. We held monthly dinners, checking in on each other's healing journey. The sign language we'd learned for cheating became our private way of communicating support during tough moments. The peer support network we established grew beyond our class. Students from multiple grades joined, creating a system where academic struggles could be addressed without shame or fear. What started as desperate rebellion evolved into lasting change. I accepted the state school scholarship, understanding that standing up for others meant accepting imperfect outcomes. The Ivy League dreams I'd held were gone, but in their place was something more valuable, the knowledge that I'd chosen integrity over personal advancement when it mattered most. Appreciate you sticking with me while I tried to figure this mess out. Definitely one of those stories that leaves you with more questions than answers. Alright, I'm out, take it easy.